All right, we are on the bottom of page 54. We did the top yesterday. So in order to write a decimal as a percent, okay, we did this very briefly on the front, on page 53. But to write a decimal as a percent, okay, you are going to, so your starting point is right here, and you're gonna move it 2 times to the right. Okay, so to convert a decimal to a percent, you're gonna move the decimal 2 spaces to the right, which is the same thing as multiplying by 100. So you think of DP, like Dr. Pepper, decimal to percent. All right, to go from a decimal to a percent, think DP, you're gonna go move your decimal to the right to go from a decimal to a percent. So what I like to do is when I get confused as to which way to write it, I'll write DP like Dr. Pepper and think D stands for decimal and P stands for percent. And I'm gonna move it 2 places to the right to go from a decimal to a percent because my decimal says 25 hundredths, but my percent sign means out of 100 already. So I need to say 25 hundredths. This is 25 out of 100. So I'm going to multiply this 0.25, 25 hundredths, times 100 so that I can write this number 25 out of 100. So both of these they mean 25 hundredths as a decimal, and then this means 25 out of 100. So they're still equivalent to each other, but this is a decimal, okay, 25 hundredths, and this is a percent, which means 25 out of 100. Both of these are still part of a whole and part of a whole. The reason why we change it from decimal to percent is because in different instances in real life, some numbers given to us are percentages and some numbers are given to us as decimals, and we have to know what the equivalents are. So again, we're going to go from decimal to percent. Okay, so let's look over here, decimal to percent. So we are going to already have the out of the 100, right? So if there was a 0 here, this would be 20 hundredths, and we want it to say 20 out of 100. So we're going to multiply by 100, and we're going to move it 2 places to the right, and that would make it 20 out of 100. So 20 cents is equal to 20%. So this is 44 cents. So you're going to guess that's going to be equal to 44%. Okay, per means out of, or 1 for every 1. So we're going to multiply it by 100 so that we can write this decimal as a percent. So we're going to move it 2 places to the right. Think we're going from a decimal to a percent. So think DP, we're going to move it to the right. 2 places because there's 2 zeros. So 44 hundredths becomes 44%, which means 44 out of 100. So now we're going to be thinking, or we're going to go from a percent back to a decimal. So a percent back to a decimal. All right, this is just a funny way to remember which way you move your decimal. So we think of Dr. Pepper. We're going from a percent and we want to change it to a decimal. So we're going to go from a percent to a decimal. We're going to move our decimal to the left. So essentially, that sign is going away. So we don't have anything to say out of 100. Right now, this is 75% like this. So since this sign is going away, we're going to replace it with a symbol of a decimal. We need it in the right place to say 75 out of 100. So we're going to divide by 100. Here's our starting point. If it's 75, remember, if there's an invisible decimal, we put it at the end of the number like a period in a sentence. So we're going to divide by 100. We're going to move it 2 places to the left, and this is where it ends up. So 75% is equal to 75 out of 100, 75 hundredths. So this is 75 out of 100, 75 out of 100. So let's look here. We have 25%. And we're going from, let's write our DP, we're going from a percent back to a decimal. So we're going to move our arrow to the left. And our invisible decimal here for 25% is at the end. we essentially are dividing by 100 because we're moving it 2 places because there's 2 zeros, 2 places to the left. So 25% is going to be equivalent to 25 hundredths. 25 out of 100, 25 out of 100. All right, we're going from percent to decimal. So here's our invisible decimal. We're going to divide by 100, 2 zeros, so we move it 2 places. So 55% is equivalent to 55 hundredths. So this is 55 out of 100, this is 55 out of 100. Now we have 6%, which means that's 6 out of 100. Okay, so if we wrote it 6 out of 100, that's 6 hundredths. That's about what we're going to write in just a moment. So our invisible decimal is at the end of the number, like a period in a sentence. And because we're going, let's write our DP, because we're going from a percent to a decimal, we're going to move our decimal to the left 2 times, because there's 2 zeros in 100. So 1, 2. So since there's an empty space here, we're going to put a 0. So 6% is equivalent to 6 hundredths, just like we said here. This is 6 out of 100. This is 6 hundredths. Okay, 1% means 1 out of 100. So we want to write that equivalent decimal. So put your period at the end. We're going to divide by 100. 1, 2. So it's going to be 1 hundredth. This is 1 out of 100. This is 1 hundredth. 100%, okay, that's equal to 1 whole. That's 1 whole pizza. So when we divide by 100, remember, DP, we're going from percent to decimal, so we're going to move our decimal to the left 1, 2 places so that you get, this is your answer, which that's just 1 whole, so you can just write 100% is equal to 1 whole. So if you have something like this, 125%, that's going to be more than 1 whole. So when you turn that into a decimal, okay, DEP, you're going from percent back to decimal. When you turn that into a decimal, there's your invisible decimal, and you move it 2 places to the left, 125% is going to be equal to 1.25. And if you were turning that into a percent, you would move it 2 places back, and that would be 125%. All right, let's look at page 54A. It comes right after 54 in your journal. So it says, a farmer watered 3/7 of a field. What percentage, so they want us to talk about percent, and I don't know if you've ever noticed that before, but percent is a 1 and a 0 and a 0 because it means out of 100. That's where they got the percent sign from. So 3/7 turned into a percentage. All right, so on the other video on page 59, we talked about taking a percent box. Here's your part, here's your whole. Percent is always something out of 100, so 100 always goes here. So 3/7, they're giving you the part of the whole, so you're going to put part of the whole. You're going to cross multiply and divide by 7, so 100 times 3 is 300, and then divided by 7. 7 goes into 3, 9, 38, 4 times. 7 goes into 20, 2 times. Okay, now still have a remainder. So we learned yesterday we put a decimal, and it gives us permission to drop a 0. 7 goes into 20. What did I do? Okay, sorry, I'm so sorry. 2 times 7 is 14, and this is supposed to be a 6. There we go. So 7 goes into 60 8 times. And now 7 goes into 40 5 times, and we're just going to stop. Okay. Normally I'd have you keep going, but no, there's not going to be in 6th grade where you're just going to keep going and going and going. Okay. So we're going to estimate that this is 42.85%. Okay, and on your homework you shouldn't have long decimals when you divide. So now we're going to be, it says number 2, a company spent 36%, now I know that that means 36 out of 100, of its annual budget developing a new bicycle. what fraction, they want us to turn it into a fraction, of the company's budget was spent on developing this new bicycle. So I already wrote it because this percent sign means out of 100, 36 out of 100. So off the top of my head, I know that both of these are even, so I could divide by 2. But look, they're still even, so I could divide by 2 again. And I'm going to get 9/25, and that is an answer choice. Number 3, a meteorologist at a television station reported that a town received 90/100 inches of rain. So they gave us a decimal. What fraction is equivalent to this amount of rain in inches? So we can put our 1s and our 0s, like we learned in earlier grades, and read 90/100. If that's not an answer choice, it wants us to probably simplify. I could, since they both end in 0, divide by 10, which is the same thing as doing an I for an I. And I have 9 over 10, which they don't have. So your other option is say, okay, I know simplest form is 9/10. So let's see which one of these is equivalent to 9/10. This is times 2. Well, this is not, so that's not equivalent. All right, we have, this is times 10, and that is not times 10. This right here is times 2, and that's times 2. Those look pretty equivalent. This right here is times 5, and that is not times 5. So C is going to be our equivalent fraction. Number 4, a craft store offered sewing classes on 12 of the 30 days. That sounds like a fraction or a ratio to me. 12 of the 30 days in November. What decimal is equivalent to this fraction of days in November that the classes were offered at the restaurant? So they want us to turn this to a decimal. So this was yesterday. A fraction is just a division problem. This basically says 12 divided by 30. So we're going to write 12 divided by 30. So last year, Miss Sanders said that imagine this number's the cowboy, and here's your saddle, and here's the horse. So the cowboy's riding the horse. At the end of the day, the cowboy always goes in the house to go to sleep, and the horse stays outside. So it's just a funny way to remember it. 30 goes into 12, 0 times, decimal, then you're allowed to drop a 0. 30 goes into 120, 4 times exactly, and I get a terminating decimal that ends with a remainder of 0. And there's my answer.